Thank you, Anna, for such a warm introduction. Makes it even more nervous. It puts you on a spot. No matter how many stages we go, but this one stage is with a lot of reverence, so I don't take it for granted. Firstly, I thank God for one more opportunity to stand in here and share this word. And this word is more of a derivative from my reflection or my personal time. Less of references, but more of a reflection from a personal time. And also thanks to Surya, who always stands by his side as and when I need support. And thanks to my family as well. Before we open the word today, and before we even call out a prayer, I think I'll imitate what Divya did. I'd request all of you to close your eyes for a reason. And just think about one person in your life that you think who's far away from restoration, who's far away from reconciliation. Maybe you're even thinking that this person is far away from grace. Hold that person in your mind for whatever they did, for whatever they cost you to be in this image. Because by the time we are done today, everything you believe about this person will be challenged. Not by me, but I pray that God will convict and you will be challenged. With that, let's bow down in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this one more opportunity that you've given me, that you've given us together to hear your word. Oh Lord, to hear about your abounding grace that penetrated me. And Lord, with the learning that I pray, every word that's spoken and to be spoken, Lord, will edify and will raise your banner alone, because you alone deserve all the glory. In Jesus' mighty name we ask and pray. Amen. Hold on to that image or that person or the circumstance or anything that came into your mind. It's sensitive, it's personal. Hold on. And with that said, the title of the sermon today is The Man on My Right. The core of this is taken from Luke chapter 23, verses 39 to 43. Any guesses? Who is this man on the right? Sorry? Yes? Yes? Okay. Let's read the verse to start with. Luke chapter 23, verse 39 to 43. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God? He said. Since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. I apologize for the format. It's muddled up a little. I call this as the most uncomfortable grace in the Bible. Most uncomfortable. Because how can a thief just in the last hour be not only forgiven, but also sanctioned with a ticket to be with Jesus in the paradise? In the order of Jesus' disciples who followed him for all their livelihood, the synagogue elders, or even the women who washed his feet, or even Lazarus who was raised from dead, not any of them were granted this ticket to finale. But the thief right there, who shared the distance of about 5 feet away from Jesus, between 3 and 5 feet, that's what the theologian says, found the ticket to be the one with Jesus in paradise. It's the thief, a condemned criminal, a man in the last hours of a wasted life. He did not attend a church, no baptism. He neither has a track record of evangelizing or being evangelized. There's no track record, no restitution. The place that he was hung in is the consequences of his own doing, his own sins. But despite of all that, Jesus still gives him freedom, freely, instantly, and for eternity. Does it really shakes us? I mean, does it makes us to think, is it so easy? Is salvation of Jesus so easy that in the last hour of a man's life that he gets it on and flies into paradise? If that doesn't bother you a little, probably we haven't thought about it long enough. And that's where it leads us to think what grace is actually all about. Very common story. I don't know why Peter always the gatekeeper in heaven. And as it says, Peter who qualifies and gives the ticket to open the gate, a man comes there and Peter says, you need to earn 1,000 points for you to enter into heaven's gate. And he asks the man to justify. The man says, I read Bible all 50 years, and Peter says 1 point. And the next thing the man says, I've been attending church without missing a Sunday, 2 more points. And then he continues to justify where the man doesn't even last more than 10 points. And the man gives up, saying that, good Lord, it could be only your grace that can get me into 1,000 points. And Peter says, yes. It's the grace of God that gets the man to pass through gate. It's not by our doing. It's not by our living. It's a turn grace that God sanctions that gets us to be with. So let's see what grace actually is, or rather let's see what actually it is not. The Greek word for grace that's used here is charis, which means unmelted, unmerited, unearned, unconditional favor flowing from God's character. That's the word charis means in a Greek translation. We very casually use this word grace in our hymns and in our benedictions, in even addressing someone, saying grace be with you. And probably that's why we have grace with us in our own home, Melinda Grace. But it's about how grace is qualified into 3 categories, or rather what grace is not. It is unearned. It is unearned. Just because, I'm still muddled with those alphabets there. Taking the reference of Romans 4 verse 4, to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. If we think grace is something that we'll have to be obliged and deserve, that's only wages as per Romans 4:4. But it clearly says his grace got to be unearned. The thief had nothing to offer. That was precisely the point. He had nothing to offer in the last point. He was unearned of the grace. The grace was sanctioned by God. The reason being is the grace, the source of grace comes from God. Ultimately, the sovereignty of the God is all that sanctions grace. In this case, Romans verse 9:15 says, a very disturbing, when you read the entire verse, it says, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. In fact, the verse extends to say, I will have compassion to whom I think who needs to have compassion. It's God's decision that defines whom he needs to have mercy and whom he needs to have compassion. because the source comes from Him. Because it's God being sovereign, the grace also comes from the sovereign source alone. Grace cannot be manipulated, or grace cannot be manufactured either. It comes from the streams of God's own sovereignty. Ultimately, it costed God a lot. It's a costly affair. It was devastating for Jesus to extend the grace. For us, it was free. But to God, it was the ultimate cost that He had to pay. Romans chapter 3, verse 25-26 says, God is both just and the justifier. The cross is where justice and grace met. The penalty was paid in full. Free to us, but it costed God everything to extend that grace. So it can be a point that we think how easy for the thief to earn, but it justifies that grace is unearned, and it comes from the sovereign sanction of our God, and it costed Him all to extend that grace. The anchor text that I took to justify this is from Paul's verse, Ephesians 2, verse 8 and 9. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. It is by grace. Again, Paul insists that it is a source of God's character, not by anyone's effort, not by anyone's doing. It originates entirely outside of us. But also Paul extends to say it's through faith. And here faith being a channel. An analogy that I could think of is, let's say there is a fire and a brigadier carries a hose which is connected to the hydrant. And then to address the fire, there's a splash of water. And the minute we see the fire coming down, ultimate for us to say, how powerful is the hose that splashes the water out? We technically give all the qualification to the hose which brings the fires down. But we fail to see it's the hydrant that powers on the water, which is God. And hose is only the channel of faith that brings down the fire by the water, which is grace. Lot many times, like Ashut rightly said, lot many times we give a lot of importance to the provision and forget the provider. In this case, lot many times we give importance to faith. Ultimate is to have the faith, but Paul insists saying it is through faith, which is a channel, but also insists saying, and this is not from yourselves, that is also the gift of God. And he concludes to say, nobody can boast about it. Either the grace that came through or the faith of channel that is given as a gift of God. Nobody can boast, but the source is from God alone, not from yourselves. Paul insists clearly that there is zero partnership between us and God in this aspect alone. There's no 90-10. It's 100% God-given only. It's not 10% of our doing and 90% of God's sanctioning. But rather there's zero partnership between us and God for the grace to be extended. And last is so that no one can boast. Grace can demolish the act of pride. The design of grace that God has created is can bring down every pride of I factor and giving it back to God, saying it was you, by your grace, through faith, is where we have been sanctioned. If grace could be earned, it would be called something else. In the other analogy, it could be wages and not the ultimate grace by itself. The man on the right, who was he? Why is he become an unnamed? Even till date, we don't have any record of who this criminal was. What are his offenses? But even 2000 years later, he's still remembered as the man on the right. The three crosses, one conversation, one choice that changed everything. In fact, the man on the right also accuses Jesus in Matthew chapter 27, verse 44. Both criminals mocked Jesus at first. He started the same pattern like the man on the left. But later he did something different, that he stands as man on the right. Historically, if you see, Roman crucifixion was reserved for the worst. Was reserved for the worst, for revolting slaves, traitors, highway robbers. And in fact, these criminals earned that format of death, unlike Jesus. A famous lawman, a Roman lawman by name Cicero, called this as the most cruel and horrifying death. He doesn't even want to talk about crucifixion amongst the Roman civilization because it's a sub-criminal standard, not even a criminal standard. And out of that is where Jesus participated. But even after 2,000 years, we are still talking about these three men, and most importantly about the man on the right who participated. The scene at the Goliath was the first, the Son of God, who was center of the cross, innocent, prayed for, killers, King of Jews. The man on the left was the mocker, a thief who mocked and who continued to mock, who stayed hard, refused the grace, even for it being just inches away. But the man on the right, the penitent, he also mocked, but something changed. What did he ask? He asked Jesus, "Would you remember me?" It is very clear the distance between probably each of the cross could have been exactly the same. The theologian says that the face of the cross had to face all the public so that everybody could see who's being crucified. But it also means there was a conversation between the man on the right and Jesus, which means it's about 5 feet to 10 feet, a conversational distance that they were able to hear Jesus praying and also a conversation. It was the same distance that the other thief also was there, but the grace was not sanctioned to him. Just because we have an access to the cross really, really close, it's not predestined and predefined that the grace is sanctioned to us as well. The difference between the man on the right and man on the left was the posture of the heart. The posture of the heart of the man on the right took him out to paradise, but man on the left, probably it is unsaid, but believed that he was led to hell. But what are the right things the man on the right did within those few moments of whisper conversation with Jesus? All the theologians from Augustine to C.S. Lewis calls this transaction between the man on the right and Jesus is compressed, unpolished, and without credentials. Even till date, there is no credential of the man on the right holds. But all the theologians call this the most compressed and unpolished conversation that a thief could have on the cross with Jesus. There are 5 things that Luke chapter 23, verse 40-42 calls out about the man on the right. Did it exactly right for him to earn the ticket to paradise. First, he calls out by starting to say, "Don't you fear God." He feared God. Relating it to Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the God is the beginning of wisdom. He asked Jesus first, "Don't you fear God?" It was a remembrance to know that the fear of the God is the beginning of wisdom, not fear of men. The second thing that he did was he confessed the guilt. He called out saying that we deserve this, partnering with the man on the left as a thief. We deserve this to be here. It was the Greek word axios that was used, which is due, fitted, exactly proportionate for what they were hung on the cross. It was indirectly proportional to the reason where Jesus was hung on the cross. Jesus was hung on the cross for our sins, but they were hung on the cross for their own sins. It was a confession, not even knowing that he was confessing, but he confessed saying that we deserve this. An act of repentance unknowingly that was called out by the man on the right. The third thing is he witnessed Christ. He calls out saying, this man has done nothing wrong. He was technically a character witness of all who fled away, saying that Jesus deserved. But he was a character witness right on the cross, recognizing that Jesus did nothing wrong. It was recognizing Jesus as the source of salvation. But he never knew he did it, but he did it right. The fourth is he addressed Jesus personally. He called out saying, Jesus, remember me. He didn't call out anything which can correlate with religion. He didn't call out anything which he heard what the crowd was saying. He made a personal commitment, directly relational to Jesus, saying, Jesus, remember me. And the last is he confessed the kingdom. He didn't say, if you come to kingdom. He called out saying, when you come into kingdom. He already confessed saying, Lord, you hold the keys of the kingdom. But he never probably meant it, but it coined out that way, that not as if, but he was sure that when you come into kingdom, would you remember me? Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the assurance of things that is not seen. It was a classic example of the man on the right called out the things that he has not seen, but defined and destined, saying, when you come into the kingdom. These 5 confessions in these 3 verses led Jesus to find a difference between the man on the right, the man on the left. Both at the same cross, both had same information, but different posture. Posture was the posture from heart. Man on the left mocked Jesus, like on the man on the right also started mocking Jesus. He had the same information as the other thief. Both heard the same amount of information, spent the same amount of information on the cross about Jesus. They were at the same distance. One made a voluntary choice to get closer. The other made his own voluntary choice to move away. One chose sarcasm over surrender. The man on the right chose to surrender. He turned into Jesus. The man on the left turned away from Jesus. The man on the left is a portrait of what happens when suffering hardens but not softens. But man on the right chose to portray what happens when suffering opens and not closes. Classic example. Even in the example of Pharaoh, he deliberated. God chose him to harden. But then later it was his choice to stay continuously in a hardened soul. The man on the left exactly displayed to stay hardened. C.S. Lewis says, God whispers in pleasures, speaks in conscience, but shouts in pain. It's the megaphone to rouse a deaf world. He picked up the megaphone and responded to Jesus. While he responded, the promise of God came. Today, you will be with me in paradise. As a result of those few minutes conversation of the man on the right, the response of promise that God gave was today. The Greek word that used is semaron, which means same day. It is not a post-dated check. No waiting, no purgatory, no intermediate process. It is the very same day As Paul says, the moment of death is where the moment of arrival. The moment one passes away is where he is found in the Lord. The same day. Corinthians 5:8 says, Paul confirms this. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Today, same day, no waiting period. It was a direct indication to the man on the right. It was not future indicative. It was not like conditional, you might be. No. It was not you should be. No. It was a declarative statement saying, you. Directly it was you. It was personal as response to the man on the right as you. Where? With me. The Greek word used was met imo. Met means me, imo means with me. You with me. Heaven is not a place with just street of gold. Place where Jesus lives is the place where heaven calls. It's the destination. Jesus says, you with me is you where I will be. That's heaven. The place where Jesus is not there is technically hell by itself. So the destination was sanctioned for the man on the right is heaven. The Greek word used was paradisos, is the same word that was used for Garden of Eden as well. God calls him back to the place of origin, is where the man will be with him in paradise. A return to the original state, the unbroken communion with God, is the place where the man was called in to be part. Is this an anomaly? Apparently no. The grammar of grace continued in multiple parallels, and it was the same parallel that happened on the cross as well. And I would like to take just 3 parallels to bring relativity. The first parallel is the prodigal son. Luke chapter 15 verse 11 to 32. I'm not going to call out the chapter. We all know what a prodigal son story is all about. He demanded, he almost said, Father, I wish you were dead. That was a relational nuclear option for him to steal the wealth. He demanded. That demand led him to the bottom to stay with pigs. He came to himself to a rock bottom. Then rehearsed the speech. He didn't even think that he will be qualified back to be a son, but at least make me a servant. And finally, what ran before the Father was grace. Grace doesn't wait for an apology to finish. And that was the story of a prodigal son. But on the contrast, there was an older brother who took offense of the entire statue of the grace. He did everything right. He was furious. He faithfully served the Father for years. He kept careful score. He refused to go into the party when he received his son. He saw grace as theft from him. Does it sound unfair? The answer is yes. For God, grace is unfair. For us, grace comes with all fairness. But the minute we need to extend that grace to the person that you thought through is unfair. How difficult it is and how contrasting it is for us to extend the grace to the person who have it in your mind, to prove back. But for God, grace stands to be unfair. The older brother's anger never transformed the brother. It was God's grace that transformed, made the brother into a prodigal son. That is the first parallel. The second parallel comes from Matthew chapter 20, verse 1 to 16. The story of workers in the vineyard. Workers are hired at dawn, more are hired at noon, more at mid-afternoon. And some astonishingly were hired at what time? 5 p.m. 1 hour before quitting. But when the payment came, did they have only 1/4? No. They had the same payment as one who served the entire day. All the workers were offended and they asked the question to the landowner. And landowner's answer is stunning in its clarity. Matthew chapter 20 verse 15 says, "Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" The Greek word for generosity is agathos. Agathos means goodness. Generosity itself means goodness. And that's what the landowner extended. The workers complained, not really about the fair wages, but about the same wages that was given to the man who worked at 5 p.m. Grace to someone else feels like a loss to those who keep score. The last parallel is the woman who was caught in adultery. John 8 verse 1 to 11. And again, we don't know what Jesus wrote on the sand. Till date, nobody knows the record of what he wrote. But Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin to be the first to throw a stone." And who left the place first? It was the oldest who left the place first. And the rest. Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go." The man who could have condemned also didn't condemn. Grace first. The call to holiness follows from grace, not before it. The question to be asked is, do we extend this grace to others? Or do we extend this grace even to that one person? If there's one person in our lives who's just like the man on the right, definitely not in a comfortable, abstract sense, but a specific person whom you thought through. Probably this person is like the son who had been in and out, like the prodigal son. Or probably this person is just like the father who was absent throughout the most formative years of your life. Or probably this person is a sibling who made wrong choices and that tore your family apart. Or probably this person is your spouse who broke trust despite of deep reconciliation. Let me ask this question. If this person would turn to you and ask, "Remember me," would you extend the same grace that God gave you to this person? When you received it free, why would you want the person to earn it back again? Of course, it boils back to say, what about accountability? Can somebody just do all that they could do and get away from the cross to paradise? Yes, fair ask. But just because the thief on the right asked Jesus, "Remember me," he was not brought down the cross and sent back home. He still went through all the consequences of death. The only one thing that changed was his destination changed from the man on the left. The consequences of sin, he still went through. The consequences of punishment, he still went through. But he attained what the man on the left did not. So if you're talking about accountability, if you're talking about earn it, what holds you back from you receiving it free as a consequences of your sins from God, extending the same free grace to the person whom you're holding accountable with? Or do you want to be the older brother? Or do you want to be the older brother where you're going back to your scores, going back to your records, going back to the things that you did right, forgetting about the things that you failed, forgetting about the things that God extended the grace, forgetting about the things that God met you at a point of rock bottom and said that you will be in paradise with me? A famous theologian says there is more grace in God than there is sin in you. If that's applicable to you, why not to others? Do you want to choose the Father's way? Run before an apology. Or do you want to be the brother's way? Wait for proofs to be shown. Wait for accountability. Do you want the grace to be immediate and not conditional? Or do you want the grace is the reward, not the gift? Earn the grace. Do you want the consequences can remain, but grace can still be given, but you secretly keep score of not extending the grace? The choice is yours. You have a clear differentiation between how grace got extended to you versus how you extend the grace to someone else. It's a relational confrontation for you to think through. Who's this man on the right? He is the result of all the three parables. He is the result of all the three parables. He is the prodigal son who wasted everything. He is the worker who was hired at the last hour. He is the woman the crowd wanted to stone, the one who felt too far gone. He is the every person who felt the door was closed. But the key difference between both these thieves is it's not the depth of sin, they were equally condemned. It was not the information, both heard the same information. It was not the intelligence of one turning to and the one other not turning. It was one thing, the posture of one's heart. That turned the man on the right to be with God. In conclusion, or rather I call it as the commission. The grace that you receive is probably the same grace someone is waiting to receive. Or probably is the same grace someone is still in the state of requirement. Freely what you have received, what stops you from freely you giving it? Grace received but not extended is a grace that is misunderstood. Think about the same person. Is that person is someone awaiting at a 5 p.m. wage? Someone who showed up late, broke everything, and is now quietly turning, revealing themselves back. But are you relating yourself like the landowner, all day working, arms folded, furious that the grace is only an offer and earn it? Or are you making someone earn what God gave you free? You met no minimum standard. You took no chance. You walked in free and walked out free. The standard God used was honesty and need. Can you apply that to the person who's standing in front of you, or the person who you thought through? Or the cross faced both the sides, to the man on the right, to the man on the left as well. It was the posture of the heart of the man on the right who attained the grace. But the man on the left also had a choice, but he declined the choice. Can you be the one standing in between like a cross by extending the grace that God gave you, like how God gave it to the man on the right? He gave it to you. Question to be asked, not to the church, not to anybody, but the question to be asked is, will you give it what you were given? This answer is to the one who gave it to you for free. Thank you.